Hello everybody, thank you for joining me. Today is the anniversary of the death in 2006 of John Profumo. His name is linked with the political scandal that brought down Harold Macmillan's government. He had an affair when he was Minister of War with the prostitute Christine Keeler, who also, she had an affair with a Russian spy, and so it was feared that secrets would be passed to the Russians from the Ministry of War through Christine Keeler. And when this affair was finally discovered and proved to be the case, although John Profumo had denied it initially, he immediately resigned. It must have seemed as though that was the end of life for him. Everything he'd stood for was now in shreds. But he moved into working with Toynbee Hall, which is a charity, a settlement in the East End, which works for the people in that community. And he, in effect, saved Toynbee Hall from having to end its work. What would we have done without him, said one of the wardens of Toynbee Hall, because in the years following his disgrace, Profumo raised thousands and thousands of pounds through his political and social connections for Toynbee Hall, and worked ceaselessly for the hall and everything it stood for. He became, he said, he adopted the Cockney role and became part of that community. What had been apparently a disaster politically for him personally became a way to discovering who he really was. And I think that's what happened. Clearly there must have been some sense of enormous guilt about what he'd done, and it may be that initially it was working out that guilt that led him to give such considerable service to Toynbee Hall. But it wasn't long before he was welcomed back into the societies and the circles which he had let down so badly. Harold Wilson, when he came to open an extension at Toynbee Hall that Profumo had fundraised for, made a point of publicly shaking his hand. He had been forgiven and welcomed back into those circles fairly soon after his disgrace. But that didn't stop him going on working for Toynbee Hall. He wasn't just doing it out of guilt. He said at one point that if you define wealth in monetary terms, there's no hope for the future. Monetary terms referring to his own wealthy background. But it's only when you realise what you have to give that you become a real person. He discovered through his work at Toynbee Hall who he really was. He discovered that he was doing something that really made him feel right and good about himself. He became, as in his own words, a real person. And it struck me as encouraging to notice that what seemed such a disaster in his personal life, although his wife stood by him right the way through, but it must have been politically and publicly an absolute disaster and devastating for him personally. But he was able to turn that into something which not only made him able to give so much back to the community in the East End, but also to discover who he really was. And I think it's really reassuring to know that sometimes what seems to us at the time to be complete disasters in our lives, when things go desperately wrong, everything seems to be hopeless and a failure. Even in those situations, we can learn, and it may be that is the door, the pathway into a different kind of life for us, a new beginning in which we discover more about ourselves and a way of living that can really satisfy us and help us to become who we really are.